इस लेक्चर सीरीज की कड़ी में द नेक्स्ट स्पीकर इज प्रोफेसर आर.पी. सिंह, डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ फिलोसफी, JNU. Sir, I invite you to kindly deliver your lecture, sir.
Thank you, Professor Pandey, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a moment of great pleasure for me to join you and department uh, on the occasion of the centenary celebration of Lucknow University. And as it has been pointed out already, that this is very rare occasion that only one vice chancellor will get this chance in 100 years' time. And Professor Alok Rai has got this opportunity, and I congratulate him. And there's week-long celebration, and in between we have got International Philosophy Day also to be celebrated on 19th November. The third Thursday of the month of November is when Socrates was born, and this time it coincides. So it is, doubly happy and great occasion. I congratulate everybody, the Department of Philosophy, Professor K.C. Pandey, the colleagues, Professor Rakesh Chandra, Dr. Prashant Sukla, I can see, and other colleagues who are there. And I also join with my fellow speakers who have already, developed a lot on the theme. And to a great extent, now I'm in a very comfortable position also that I can omit certain aspects of it which are there and come to my theme very quickly. And the first thing which I would like to deal with is about the myth of contemporary Indian philosophy. In fact, in academic circle, it happens that when we go to the classrooms, we generally take certain arbitrary decisions. We classify the studies in the ancient, medieval, modern, or postmodern, or contemporary, kind of a thing. This is purely academic enterprise so that we can organize the ideas and place it before the students. There is no thematic rupture into it. Themes have been running all across. As a historian, Balmukundi must be knowing that there are many issues from the ancient philosophy history which reoccurs in the medieval times, from the medieval to the modern times, and so on and so forth. There is no rupture. Thematically, there is absolutely no rupture between it. But we take it as an academic kind of exercise so that we can manage the ideas in some kind of chronological manner. But it is maybe arbitrary, but still we have to have it, because otherwise we cannot articulate the ideas. This is necessity of our thinking. And when we talk about contemporary Indian philosophy, the question arises that how is it different from contemporary Western philosophy? So if we look at the contemporary Western philosophy, which started from late 19th century to the 20th century, and before that we have the modern philosophy. So here we find that in both the contemporary Western philosophy and the modern Western philosophy, they have tried to propose a kind of critique of medieval philosophy, both the trends. But in Indian philosophy, there is no such thing. So in contemporary Indian philosophers, they have tried to, reincorporate various valuable ideas from the tradition itself, which is Sanatan kind of a thing, perpetually there. So they have tried to revive it, revitalize it, but giving a new flavor to it. It may reappear like a new Vedanta kind of a thing, or practical Vedanta kind of a thing, integral yoga kind of a thing, or process philosophy, but it has been there. Another remarkable feature is that, contemporary Western philosophy and also large part of modern Western philosophy, from Humboldt, Hegel, and Herder, and to some extent, rather I will say that to a great extent, even Immanuel Kant, they were aware of Indian philosophy. Immanuel Kant's book, Perpetual Peace, in which, in the definitive article number 3, he has quoted about the concept of Om and the notion of absolute in Indian tradition, particularly in the Upanishads and all that stuff. So it is there. And Friedrich von Humboldt had given 5 lectures on Bhagavad Gita, which was attended by Hegel, and Hegel had proposed a review of it. Indian Council of Philosophical Research had published this book in 1995. So Herbert Herring from Chennai Max Muller Bhavan. He had translated it, from German into English. That text is there. Schopenhauer, he was well aware of what is Upanishadic philosophy. Nietzsche was aware of it, and not to talk about Max Muller and Paul Dawson, who were the Indologists, the German Indologists, and even today also Paul Hacker and William Hapas, they were aware of it. British Indologists, they were aware of it, but there were some problems. Whether it was James Mill or it was, Archer, whom I'll be taking up in my presentation, they had a definite interest to project India in a miserable manner. And that is the issue I'll be addressing today. So, Western contemporary philosophy, they were aware of Indian philosophy. So is the case with Indian contemporary philosophers. They were also aware of the Western philosophy. From Raja Ram Mohan Rai, because Ram Mohan Rai, he had, correspondence with Bentham and even Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Tagore. They all had studied thoroughly Western philosophy. K.C. Bhattacharya, very substantively, it is there. So they were aware of the Western philosophy, and they tried to appropriate in a very substantive manner in the presentation. So this is one thing, but there are certain issues which were not, Western philosophers were not able to grasp. Particularly, if we take up Upanishads, what do the Upanishads do for us? Upanishads are exploratory in nature. They explore the ideas with various metaphoric and suggestive terminologies. So there is a huge exploration of ideas in the Upanishads, and Upanishads have borrowed those ideas from the Vedas, because every Upanishad belongs to some kind of Veda or the other. So there is no rupture between them. Now, these Upanishads were gradually compiled in terms of the sutras. Sutra was the period of compilation of it, and then the Bhashya is an attempt to some kind of comparative study about it. So Sutra period from Gemini to Badarayana is a kind of compilation. Now these are some of the difficult nuances which Western contemporary and also the modern philosophers fail to understand and appreciate it, because the way it has been developing and all that. But apparently they were aware of it, and I can understand in 1705 the translation of Bhagavad Gita in Persian had reached to University of Königsberg and University of Berlin. I have information about it. So these are some of the issues which I wanted to place first. Now the lecture which I am going to take up today is about Sri Aurobindo, and the text was Foundations of Indian Culture. Since time is limited, so what I will do, I'll move gradually, and as when the time comes up, I'll stop. And rest of the things depend, can be managed later on. So this book, in two ways I will try to articulate this text. One is the retrospect, and the other is the prospect of this book. So in the retrospect, there are two texts which I'll be trying to give some kind of a reflection. One is James Mill's History of India in 3 volumes, and the other is William Archer, who has criticized Indian culture and all that stuff in 1918. James Mill had written the book in 1817, and William Archer, after 100 years, he writes the book on Indian culture, Is India Civilized, and other issues which are there that I'll be taking up. In between, we have Karl Marx also in 1857. That time he was the correspondent of New York Daily Tribune, and he had written substantially about the mutiny in India. And that was the time when modernity in India started coming up. Many universities started emerging, and Lucknow University came up late, but in 1858 or 59, Calcutta University came up, then gradually Mumbai University, Madras University, then gradually Allahabad University, after that Lucknow University, they all started coming up gradually after that mutiny during modern times only. And this story is there. So in Sri Aurobindo's book, this The Foundations of Indian Culture, it was basically a response to William Archer's objections on Indian philosophy, culture, science, and technology. And in a way, the way we understand Indian philosophy, he was trying to repudiate it. Even the language also, he was trying to say that India doesn't have, substantive linguistic capabilities. And from 1920 onwards, Sri Aurobindo started writing on it as a kind of response to William Archer's charges. And he wrote 6 articles, which were gradually, after his death, it was published as The Foundations of Indian Culture in 1953, and posthumously published. Now, the kind of charges which William Archer has raised on Indian are around 5-6 charges, very serious charges, and which he has labeled on India. And the first thing is that, India must be proved altogether barbarian. That barbarian means barbaros, the person who just babbles and doesn't have a particular language to speak in proper sentences. There is no grammar, nothing like that. So he thought that in India, you have only there is no perfect language, no, grammar kind of a thing, no concept of propositions and sentences and everything. And they are just like, barbarian who simply babble the words without any perfect. So it is to be understood that William Archer never came to India and he knew no Indian languages. So was the case with James Mill and also with Marx. None of them. But they thought that they are the experts of India in the West. And this was a genuine problem. The second charge which he had labeled was that in India, there is some kind of, they attach the concept of spirituality and some kind of practice of reason without any substantive background about it. So they thought that it's not philosophy, it's also not a religion, it's some kind of spiritual experience they have, and which is very intuitive, and it becomes something which is unmanifest, and we just cannot understand it because it is altogether otherworldly. This was the second charge he has labeled. The third is that it is regarding the relationship between philosophy and religion. Is the next charge that in India there is no philosophy, it's only a kind of religion which they are practicing. It is all kind of rituals which are followed by everybody, and there is no philosophical thinking kind of a thing. So this is another charge. And then certain concepts, like he has said that Indian culture is something which doesn't have hope, and it is internally irrational kind of a composition, and this is another charge. Likewise, there are many other charges, and that India doesn't have any kind of science and technology. It doesn't have any concept of medicine, health, and life, and longevity and all that stuff. So altogether, these are the charges which have been labeled by William Archer. Now, Sri Aurobindo, he takes up, everything into account and tries to respond to William Archer. First thing which Sri Aurobindo says that William Archer has been very ill-informed about India, because whatever information he got from the British Museum Library, that's all was the case. And in the British Museum Library, because that was the time of First World War, 1918, when the book was published, and it must have taken 4 or 5 years, for him to prepare the manuscript and get it published. So during that period of time, Britishers had also realized that British imperialism is under crisis, and they needed some kind of an ideological backup so that they can stand firm on their ground, so that imperialism is intact in India. So that was basically the mastermind behind it. Because I remember when James Mill wrote History of India, he divided it into 3 parts: the Maurya Gupta period, and then the Mughal period, which he called as Hindu period, Mughal period, and British period. And it is only in the British period that he had developed substantive developments in India, and others are just mere narrative aspect of it. And every Britisher who were asked to go to India for some kind of assignment or the other, they were all interviewed on the basis of this book only. Have you read James Mill's History of India? If yes, then what are the issues he has taken up? And you have to look at India from that point of view only. So this was the kind of contention they had. And then after 100 years, William Archer's book comes out, and it was very much welcomed there. But by then, India had also come to a position to understand the Western mind and to respond about it. So they were all ill-informed, because they even didn't know that Vedas have been written in a language which is one of the oldest language in the world, the Sanskrit, and one of the most perfect language. And he was not even informed to this extent, that there are Vedas, there are Upanishads, there are epics, there are Puranas, and then there are systems of thought which have been going on for so many years in the Shruti Parampara, and then the way it has come out in the published forms also after 15th, 16th century onwards. So he was not informed about it. And he was not even informed about the texts which are available, whether they are Vedas or Upanishads, and the traditions which are there like Vedanta, Sankhya. German Indologists were aware of it. Max Muller had written a lot about all these things. So the materials were available there, but he deliberately did not take up these issues into consideration. William Archer. Another charge which I have just mentioned about, that in India, there is some kind of, spirituality, but there is no ethics. I remember, because this was a very challenging kind of a thing, that Indian philosophy of morals. Professor Rajendra Prasad, when he took up this project under FISP, and Professor Sinha was also there, one of the contributors. I was also there. And so there, how to understand Indian philosophy of morals, the Purusharthas, Abhyudaya and Nishreyas, the ashram tradition kind of a thing, and the metaphysics which is evolving out of it in terms of knowledge, mysticism, etc. Some kind of integrated approach, which is very substantially there. So this also had, he had also not taken it into account. And most surprisingly, when he says that Indian philosophy, or in India, there is no science. So there is no chemistry in Indian philosophy, in Indian tradition, and there are so many archaeological evidences which were available in the British Museum library about the iron pillar and everything else. But he was deliberately trying to avoid all these things. And if at all he was giving some credit, he was giving credit to the Arabs, about this kind of a thing. This is again kind of a misinterpretation, and there are so many other things. So I will take up Sri Aurobindo's positive positions which are there. Much has been already said by Professor R.C. Sinha about the integral philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, the epistemological and the metaphysical domains of it. I would like to place maybe 2 or 3 such points for your consideration. One, that since Sri Aurobindo was aware of the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and also to a great extent of Aristotle's philosophy, Greek philosophy. So he was very fascinated about it. Now in Aristotle, we come across a division of knowledge into 3 branches. So one is the theoretical, other is practical, and then another is productive. In the theoretical, we have the metaphysics or ontology kind of a thing. In the practical, we have the ethics, and in the productive, we have the aesthetics. This kind of division of human enterprise into 3 domains has substantially developed in Immanuel Kant, with pure reason, practical reason, and the judgment. And these 3 critiques become the landmarks of European modernity. Now, Sri Aurobindo was also trying to articulate Indian culture, philosophy, and aesthetics and everything into these three domains. So you have the life divine and human cycle as the Vidya aspect of it. Then we have the integral yoga sadhana aspect of it. So, and finally Savitri, the aesthetic aspect of it. But there is no rupture. In Kant, there is a rupture between them. He was trying to synthesize it in the critique of judgment, but it remains a kind of question mark between pure reason and the practical reason. In case of Sri Aurobindo, there is integral, synthesis between all the three domains of human knowledge: Vidya, Sadhana, and Kala. This is the Indian culture is known as a way of life. And the way of life is manifested in the Vidya, Sadhana, and the Kala. This is one aspect. And the other thing is that, in which we find that the now there is another insight besides Aristotle and Kant, and that insight comes from Karl Lamprecht. So he had died in 1915. So he was basically a historian, and I think Bal Mukundji must be knowing about him. His book, What is History? 5 lectures on modern science of history, and which was edited and developed by William Edward Dodd. So what he has done, he has developed 4 stages of human development. The first is the symbolic kind of a stage, which we find in almost all the tribal communities. And second is the typal and the conventional, where typologies and conventions are created, and thereby the belief systems are made, and belief systems are examined, then epistemology emerges. Metaphysics also comes up in that course of time. And the third stage is individualistic, which is the characteristic feature of modernity and individualistic. Fourth stage is subjective kind of a stage. These are the 4 stages of which Karl Lamprecht has developed, and Sri Aurobindo has also studied it, appreciated it, but he has added the 5th dimension to it. The 5th dimension is the spiritual dimension, and this is something which is a unique contribution, and this we find in the human cycle is the text where he has developed it. And then he goes into the details of man and his transformation, the transformation from psychic to the spiritual and to the supramental, 3 levels of transformations which we find into it. And I cannot go into all the details of it because the paucity of time, and I think my time is also nearing to an end. So I'll take 2 minutes.
Time
should I take 2 minutes more?
2 minutes, okay, sir.
Okay, 2 minutes more, because this is the thing which has been there, and after during that time only, there was another movement which came up, which was known as Neo Vedanta, Abhinav Vedanta. There was one magazine which used to come in Bengali, 1817 onwards. It started coming up. Ram Mohan Rai used to contribute a lot into it, and they put the name Neo Vedanta on the basis of Neoplatonism, which was there in the 4th and 5th century. Plotinus, Iamblichus, Porphyry, so many other philosophers were there, and with Dr. Paulus Mar Gregorius, and if Professor R.C. Sinha remembers him, so he's the one who had organized 4 days international conference on Neoplatonism, and we had full episode on Neo Vedanta also in that seminar. So this Neo Vedanta, and from which we find Vivekananda and others, they sprang up, and the Neo Vedantins were specifically the adoption of Western values and approaches, and the subsequent attempt to find those values embedded in indigenous Indian traditions. There are, of course, various degrees to which a writer or a movement can be called neo-Hindu. In this regard, interestingly, there was one philosopher, Paul Hacker, who had come to India. He studied Sanskrit language in order to understand Indian culture and everything. And he was a great traveler. He used to off and on come back from Germany to India and go back. So in the 70s and 80s, he was there. And William Hapas, he had written a lot about Paul Hacker. And then he was taking up the kind of, Neo-Vedantin approach and trying to manifest it in the context of Vivekananda and also about Sri Aurobindo. Now, Sri Aurobindo, it was a Calcutta University professor, I'm forgetting his name, so one who had taught in Hegel, D.M. Datta. No, not D.M. Datta. So,
D.M. Datta was in Patna.
What name did you say?
D.M. Datta was in Patna.
No, not D.M. Datta. So he was Calcutta University professor. So B.N. Seal, Brijennath Seal. Yeah, Brijennath Seal was the one who had taught Hegel to Sri Aurobindo. And in 1922, he was the one who was asked by the British government to float syllabus of Indian philosophy for MA program. And in 1922. And he had taken up Madhvacharya's book, Sarvadarshan Sangra, because it comprises of 16 chapters. So 8 chapters in the first year and 8 chapters in the second year, kind of a thing. In 1922, the first syllabus was floated by him. And he's the man with whom Sri Aurobindo had studied Hegel. So in Sri Aurobindo's in integral philosophy, Hegel's philosophy is something which is very substantially there, because therein only we move from sense certainty to understanding, from both these to the reason, and then to the absolute or the absolute Geist, absolute spirit. This kind of ascendance is there in Sri Aurobindo. So this kind of evolution is there, which is integral kind of a thing, from material to the, I think Professor K.C. Pandey is looking at me. So this is a kind, I can understand Pandey, the constraint you have. So this insight is also there. And now I think I should stop here with another round of thanks to everybody, for the participants, and Professor K.C. Pandey, Professor Sinha, and my fellow speakers like Adian Bajpayee, wonderful talk he gave, and Professor Bal Mukund, and of course Professor R.C. Sinha is wonderful all the time. And I again congratulate you all for celebrating the centenary occasion of the university, and also this International Philosophy Day. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.